It was a crisp evening in 1920, and the small, close-knit village of Hoar Verde was alive with the familiar sounds of dusk. Laughter spilled from open windows, the aroma of 100 different dinners mingled in the air, and children's shouts echoed through the cobblestone streets. Imagine it, families gathering around tables, candles flickering, stories being shared over steaming plates. A perfect, ordinary night. But here's where ordinary curdled into something truly unsettling, because as the moon climbed higher, something else settled over Hoar Verde, a silence so profound, so absolute, that it swallowed every sound, every whisper, every heartbeat. The next morning, the village was empty, not a soul, not a trace, just plates on tables, fires and hearths, and an entire community vanished. What happened in Hoar Verde that night? Was it a miracle, a mass abduction, or something far more chilling? Something that defies explanation even today. Before we dive deeper into this bewildering mystery, if you're as fascinated by the unexplained as I am, go ahead and hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more journeys into the unknown, and ring that notification bell so you won't miss a single upload. Sharing this video with your friends also helps us unravel more of history's greatest enigmas together. The year is 1920, a time when the world was still reeling from the Great War, yet optimistic about the roaring 20s on the horizon, but tucked away in a quiet, unassuming corner of the world. In a place we now know as Hoar Verde, a different kind of silence was brewing. It wasn't the silence of peace, but something far more unsettling. Imagine a sleepy village, much like countless others across rural landscapes, where life moved at the rhythm of the sun and seasons. Hoar Verde wasn't a bustling metropolis. It was a community built on shared harvests, familiar faces, and the simple, predictable patterns of daily existence. This was a place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were few, and where the unexpected was, well, truly unexpected. The days leading up to that fateful evening in 1920 were, by all accounts, perfectly ordinary. Farmers tended their fields, merchants opened their shops, and children chased each other through dusty lanes. There were no ominous omens, no strange lights in the sky, no whispers of ancient curses, just the comforting hum of life in a small, self-contained world. So, how could such an ordinary setting become the stage for something so profoundly extraordinary, so utterly bizarre, that it would echo through history as one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries? What could possibly lead an entire community, vibrant and alive one moment, to simply disappear the next? Asterisk, the night of the disappearance. A cool evening breeze rustled through the trees surrounding Hoar Verde. Accounts, pieced together much later from bewildered neighbors in nearby hamlets, speak of nothing out of the ordinary. There were no shouts, no panicked cries carried on the wind, just the usual settling in for the night. Families, as was their custom, were sitting down to their evening meals. Picture the scene: the warm glow of oil lamps spilling from windows, the clinking of cutlery against plates, the low murmur of conversation. Perhaps a father was recounting his day in the fields, a mother was scolding a child gently for fidgeting, or siblings were bickering playfully over the last morsel of bread. These were not people preparing for an exodus, or bracing for an attack. They were simply living. What makes this particular vanishing so utterly chilling is the mundane backdrop against which it occurred. There was no earthquake, no devastating flood, no invading army laying siege. Hoar Verde wasn't a village on the edge of a precipice, geographically or politically. It was stable, unremarkable, and utterly unprepared for the silent, invisible force that seemed to scoop it clean off the map. This wasn't a gradual emptying, like a town abandoned due to economic decline or natural disaster. This was sudden, absolute. One moment, life hummed. The next, it was gone. And perhaps the most haunting detail of all: there were no witnesses. No one from outside the village saw anything amiss. The silence that descended was not just within Hoar Verde itself, but stretched out, seemingly swallowing any potential observer as well. How can an entire community vanish without a single soul seeing, hearing, or even suspecting a thing? It's a question that chills you to the bone, isn't it? Asterisk, the lack of any immediate alarm from outside Hoar Verde is, in itself, a crucial piece of this perplexing puzzle. Consider the social fabric of rural communities in 1920. News traveled slowly, often by word of mouth, but it did travel. Villages were interconnected by family ties, trade routes, and shared community events. It wasn't like today, where a sudden silence from a town might trigger a dozen frantic phone calls. Yet, even in that less connected era, an entire village simply ceasing to communicate should have raised eyebrows within hours, if not a day. But it didn't. Not right away. The first inklings of something being profoundly wrong only emerged the following morning, and even then, not due to a direct observation of the vanished village. Instead, it was the absence of its people that began to ripple outwards. Perhaps a merchant from a neighboring town, expecting a delivery, found his usual contact from Hoar Verde inexplicably absent. Maybe a relative, planning a visit, arrived, to find an eerie stillness where there should have been the cheerful din of morning activity. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic discovery, but a slow, creeping realization that something was terribly, fundamentally amiss. This delayed recognition only deepens the mystery. What kind of event could be so swift, so complete, that it left no immediate ripple, no single cry for help that could escape its borders? It's as if Hoar Verde was simply unzipped from reality. The initial alarm, when it finally coalesced, wasn't born of panic, but of confusion and a growing unease. Imagine the scene. A lone farmer from a nearby hamlet, perhaps on his way to Hoar Verde to trade goods or collect a promised tool, approaches the village as the morning mist begins to burn off. He expects the familiar sounds of a crow of a rooster, the lowing of cattle, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Instead, he's met with an unnerving quiet. He might pause, thinking perhaps he's too early, or that the villagers are simply sleeping in. But as he steps further into the main street, the silence becomes oppressive, almost physical. He'd see open doors, perhaps a dog wandering aimlessly, but no people. A half-eaten meal on a table, a child's toy left in the dirt, laundry still, hanging on a line, gently swaying in the morning breeze. Everything points to a sudden, instantaneous departure, not a planned evacuation. There's no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no hastily packed bags. Just an emptiness where vibrant life had been hours before. This wasn't a village abandoned due to plague or war, where bodies might lie in the streets or signs of conflict would be evident. This was as if the very air had simply decided to unpeople the place, leaving behind only the inert objects of daily life as silent, haunting witnesses. The sheer normalcy of the setting, juxtaposed with the absolute lack of human presence, must have been profoundly disorienting, triggering a primal sense of dread that something truly unnatural had occurred. The news. Once it finally broke through, the initial disbelief spread like wildfire, albeit at the pace of 1920s communication. Messengers on horseback, then later by telegraph, would have carried the astonishing, almost unbelievable report. An entire village, simply gone. Imagine the hushed conversations, the fearful glances exchanged in neighboring communities. How could this be? What unseen force could pluck dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people from their homes without a trace? The initial reaction wasn't just shock, it was profound bewilderment, quickly followed by a creeping fear. If it could happen to Hoar Verde, could it happen to them? Authorities, likely local constabulary at first, would have been dispatched. Picture these early investigators, arriving at Hoar Verde with a mix of skepticism and mounting dread. They'd meticulously search, going house to house, barn to barn, each undisturbed scene deepening the enigma rather than solving it. The untouched meals, the unmade beds, the tools left mid-task, every detail screamed sudden disappearance, not careful evacuation. There were no footprints leading away from the village in any significant numbers, no signs of a mass migration. It was as if the villagers had simply dissolved. This wasn't just a missing persons case, it was a missing village case. And for the people tasked with understanding it, this was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It defied logic, it defied explanation, and it defied every conventional method of investigation they possessed. The question wasn't just where did they go, but how. This wasn't merely a local tragedy. It quickly became something far more profound. The story of Hoar Verde wasn't just a grim headline. It was a chilling narrative that gnawed at the edges of collective understanding. Imagine how people in other small, isolated communities must have felt. They lived lives intertwined with the rhythm of nature, dependent on their neighbors, and deeply rooted in their land. The idea that their entire way of life, their very existence, could be simply erased overnight without a trace would have been deeply, viscerally frightening. It challenged the fundamental sense of order and safety that most people take for granted. Local folklore, already rich in tales of the uncanny, would have instantly absorbed this new, terrifying reality. Whispers of vengeful spirits, ancient curses, or even a divine judgment would have circulated alongside more rational, though equally unproven theories. The mystery of Hoar Verde became more than just a police investigation. It became a cautionary tale, a subject of hushed conversations around kitchen tables and crackling fires. It fed into a primal human fear, the fear of the unknown, of forces beyond our comprehension that can snatch away life as easily as a breath. And as those first bewildering days turned into weeks, and then months, the absence of answers only cemented Hoar Verde's place as a truly unique and terrifying enigma in the annals of unsolved mysteries. The morning after the disappearance, as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across an eerily quiet landscape, the true, chilling nature of the Hoar Verde mystery began to sink in. Imagine the initial search parties, bewildered farmers, a few local constables, perhaps some concerned relatives from nearby villages stepping into what should have been a bustling community. What they found wasn't a scene of chaos or destruction, but something far more unsettling, a perfectly preserved tableau of everyday life, abruptly abandoned. Picture this: a hearth still warm with embers from the previous night's fire, a kettle poised to boil for morning tea, perhaps even a half-knitted garment with needles still poking from the wool. In the village bakery, dough might have been left rising, destined never to be baked. In the fields, tools lay where they had been dropped at dusk, ready for the next day's work that never came. This wasn't a town ravaged by fire or flood. There were no collapsed buildings, no widespread debris. It was as if a giant, invisible hand had simply lifted every living being out of their routines, leaving behind only the inanimate objects as silent, chilling witnesses to an unimaginable event. The sheer normalcy of the setting, contrasted with the absolute absence of people, created an almost surreal, dreamlike quality, or perhaps a nightmare. Asterisk, the lack of disturbance was perhaps the most confounding detail. When a disaster strikes, it usually leaves a signature: overturned furniture, scattered belongings, signs of a desperate struggle, or a hurried departure. But in Horror Verde, everything was uncannily in its place. Plates were still on tables, some with scraps of food, indicating meals that were interrupted midway. Clothes hung neatly on pegs. Tools and workshops lay organized. This wasn't a panicked flight, it was an instantaneous, inexplicable vanishing. How do you process a scene where the only evidence is the absence of something? It's like looking at a perfectly set stage after the actors have disappeared into thin air, leaving their props behind. Even the village animals, often the first to react to unusual events, seemed largely unperturbed. Livestock were found in their pens, perhaps restless for their morning feed but otherwise unharmed. Dogs might have barked at the arrival of the search parties, but there were no signs of them having been distressed or agitated the night before. This detail is crucial. If there had been a struggle, a violent abduction, or even a stampede, the animals would surely have reacted with fear or aggression. Their relative calm only deepened the enigma. It suggested a transition so seamless, so utterly without physical disruption, that it defies all conventional understanding of how a large group of people could simply cease to exist. What kind of force could be so precise, so quiet, and so absolute in its execution? Asterisk, the initial investigations, rudimentary by today's standards, yielded precisely nothing. No footprints leading away from the village that weren't accounted for by the search parties themselves. No discarded belongings along any road. No signs of struggle, no blood, no broken windows, no ransacked homes. It was as if the villagers had simply faded into the very air they breathed. Think of any crime scene you've ever heard of. There's always something. A dropped item, a scuff mark, a forced entry. Horror Verde offered none of that. It was pristine in its emptiness. This profound lack of conventional evidence meant that the investigators, whoever they were at that early stage, were immediately at a loss. Their training, their experience, their very understanding of cause and effect, offered no framework for this phenomenon. How do you gather clues when there are no clues to gather? How do you interview witnesses when all the witnesses are gone? The silence of the village wasn't just auditory, it was a silence of information, a void that swallowed every attempt at logical deduction. It left behind only questions, and the chilling realization that some events simply refuse to conform to the rules of our known world. It's a truly humbling and terrifying thought, isn't it? To face a mystery so complete, it renders all your tools useless. Asterisk, the psychological impact of discovering Horror Verde's emptiness must have been immense, bordering on the traumatic for those first responders. Imagine the dawning horror as they moved from house to house, the hope of finding someone, anyone, slowly eroding into a cold dread, each untouched plate, each unmade bed, each children's toy left precisely where it fell, served not as a clue, but as a chilling monument to absence. This wasn't a tragedy they could easily categorize, no bodies to mourn, no clear cause to point to, no enemy to blame. It was a vacuum, a hole in reality. This unquantifiable nature of the disaster would have left a deep mark. How do you process grief for people who are simply not there? How do you explain to families that their loved ones have vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the mundane objects of their last moments? The lack of closure, the inability to grasp what had occurred, would have lingered like a ghost over the surrounding communities. Horror Verde became a gaping wound in the landscape, a silent testament to the fragility of human existence and the terrifying possibility that some forces operate entirely beyond our comprehension. It wasn't just a place where people disappeared. It was a place where understanding itself seemed to vanish. As days turned into weeks, the initial confusion surrounding Horror Verde gave way to a more structured, though ultimately futile, investigation. Local authorities, overwhelmed by the sheer scale and baffling nature of the event, would have surely sought assistance from regional or even national levels. Imagine a flurry of telegrams, desperate pleas for expertise, for anyone who might make sense of this unprecedented situation. Yet, in 1920, the tools for such an investigation were incredibly limited. Forensics, as we know it today, was in its infancy. Satellite imagery was science fiction. Even large-scale, coordinated ground searches were logistically challenging. So, what did they do? They would have interviewed anyone who had last seen a villager, no doubt compiling lists of names, checking for any disgruntled individuals or known wanderers. They would have meticulously, if fruitlessly, combed the surrounding forests and hillsides, but with no trail to follow, no witness accounts of anything out of the ordinary, and no physical evidence. Their efforts were like searching for a ghost. In a fog, every avenue they pursued led to a dead end. The silence of Hoar Verde wasn't just a physical absence, it was an investigative brick wall, utterly impenetrable. It forced those involved to confront the unsettling truth that some mysteries simply refused to yield their secrets, leaving behind only the profound, aching echo of absence. With no concrete answers, the vacuum left by Hoar Verde's disappearance was rapidly filled by speculation. Human nature abhors a vacuum, especially one so profound and terrifying. As official investigations hit dead ends, the public, and indeed, many of the frustrated investigators themselves, began to grasp at straws. Theories, some grounded in a desperate search for logic, others soaring into the realm of the fantastic, began to circulate like wildfire, whispered from neighbor to neighbor, gaining momentum with each retelling. What could possibly explain such a complete and instantaneous vanishing act? One of the most immediate, and perhaps comforting theories for some, was a mass exodus. Could the entire village have simply packed up and left? Perhaps a secret religious cult had convinced everyone to embark on a pilgrimage, vanishing into the vast wilderness, or finding a new, hidden settlement. While romantic, this theory quickly crumbled under scrutiny. Where were the packed wagons, the worn trails, and why, crucially, would they leave behind their daily lives so utterly undisturbed? Meals on tables, fires and hearths. A planned departure, even a sudden one, leaves some trace of preparation, of movement. The scene in Hoar Verde spoke not of people leaving, but of people being gone. It was a theory born more of a desire for a rational explanation than any supporting evidence, illustrating how desperately people yearned for a familiar narrative, even if it stretched credulity. Asterisk if a voluntary departure seemed unlikely. What about something forced? The specter of organized crime or banditry might have crossed some minds, especially in an era where remote regions could be vulnerable. Could a ruthless gang have swept in, abducted every man, woman, and child, and then meticulously cleaned up any signs of struggle? It's a terrifying thought, but again, the evidence simply didn't align. A mass abduction of this scale, involving so many individuals, would be incredibly difficult to execute silently and without leaving behind any physical evidence. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no discarded weapons, no disturbed ground indicating a struggle involving dozens, let alone hundreds, of people. And where would such a large group of captives be taken? How would they be hidden? The logistics alone make this theory highly improbable. Then there was the possibility of a natural disaster, but one so bizarre and localized that it left no conventional traces. Could a unique type of gas emission have rendered everyone unconscious, and then disintegrated them? Or perhaps some unknown, highly localized atmospheric phenomenon? While fascinating and pushing the boundaries of scientific understanding at the time, these ideas often lacked any geological or meteorological precedent. There were no reports of strange fogs, unusual atmospheric pressures, or localized tremors on that night. The lack of any residual effect, no strange odors, no peculiar residue, further weakened these natural, yet extraordinary, explanations. It was as if whatever happened with surgical precision, impacting only the living beings and nothing else. Asterisk when conventional explanations fail. The human mind, often in desperation, turns to the unconventional, and so, the whispers of the supernatural began to take hold, offering a terrifying yet strangely comforting framework for the unexplainable. Was Hoar Verde cursed? Had ancient spirits been disturbed? Tales of malevolent entities, of forgotten gods, or even of a direct divine intervention, began to circulate. Some suggested a rapture-like event, where the villagers were simply lifted away by an unseen, otherworldly force. Others spoke of a portal, a tear in the fabric of reality that had momentarily opened, swallowing the entire community before snapping shut. These theories, while lacking any empirical basis, resonated deeply with a public grappling with the unfathomable. They offered a narrative, however fantastical, that accounted for the complete absence of physical evidence and the baffling instantaneousness of the event. It's easier, perhaps, to believe in ghosts or gateways than to accept that an entire village could simply cease to be without any identifiable cause. This era, still steeped in a mix of burgeoning scientific understanding and lingering folklore, provided fertile ground for such fantastical interpretations. The very inexplicable nature of the event made it ripe for myth-making, transforming Hoar Verde from a missing persons case into a chilling legend. Asterisk the emergence of these wilder theories, while a natural human response to the unknown, posed significant challenges for any official investigation. How do you investigate a curse, or a portal? In 1920, the concept of a dedicated paranormal research team was virtually non-existent, and even if it were, such claims would fall far outside the purview of traditional law enforcement. The authorities, already baffled by the lack of physical evidence, found themselves in an impossible position. They were tasked with solving a mystery that seemed to defy the very laws of physics and common sense. Their primary tools were interviews, ground searches, and a rudimentary understanding of crime. All of these were rendered useless by an event that left no witnesses, no struggle, and no discernible path. They couldn't dust 4 fingerprints on thin air. They couldn't question a community that was no longer there. The limitations of early 20th century investigative techniques were starkly exposed by the Hoar Verde incident. It was a case that demanded answers beyond the scope of their capabilities, forcing them into a frustrating cycle of searching, finding nothing, and then having to contend with increasingly desperate and outlandish public theories. This wasn't just a puzzle. It was an investigative abyss, a black hole of information that swallowed every effort to shed light on it. Ultimately, despite the flurry of theories, rational, fantastical, and everything in between, no single explanation ever gained credible traction or provided a shred of tangible evidence. The inability to definitively prove or disprove any of these ideas only deepened the enigma of Hoar Verde. Every proposed answer, from the mundane to the miraculous, simply highlighted the gaping hole in understanding, and this void, this lack of resolution, had a profound effect for the public. It meant the mystery wasn't just a fleeting news item, it became an enduring legend, a chilling tale passed down through generations. For the authorities, it was a cold case of unprecedented scale, a file that could never truly be closed because there was no crime, no victim, and no perpetrator in any conventional sense. The sheer completeness of the vanishing, coupled with the frustrating absence of clues, ensured that Hoar Verde wouldn't just be forgotten. Instead, it would evolve, becoming a dark, fascinating corner of history where logic failed, and the inexplicable reigned supreme. It remains a stark reminder that some questions, perhaps the most unsettling ones, are destined to remain unanswered, perpetually fueling our fascination with the unknown. The immediate shock and confusion surrounding Hoar Verde's disappearance eventually subsided, but the story itself refused to fade. Instead, like a seed planted in fertile, mysterious ground, it began to grow, twisting and turning, adapting to the popular imagination until it fully blossomed into a local legend, and eventually, a subject of wider, almost obsessive, fascination. How does a real-life enigma transition from a news event to a timeless tale whispered around campfires and debated in hushed academic circles? It's often through the sheer power of its unresolved nature. For generations, the tale of Hoar Verde became a cautionary myth, a chilling what-if scenario for those living in isolated communities. Parents might have used it to warn children about venturing too far, or storytellers might have embellished it to explain inexplicable sounds in the night. The very lack of a definitive answer allowed the narrative to be shaped and reshaped, each retelling adding a layer of mystery, a new subtle detail that enhanced its eerie allure. Was it a fog that swallowed them whole? A strange light in the sky? The specifics became less important than the terrifying core truth. An entire village just vanished. This oral tradition kept the flame of mystery alive, ensuring that Hoar Verde remained more than just a forgotten incident. It became a part of the cultural fabric of the region. As the decades turned, the tale of Hoar Verde, once a local whisper, began to filter into broader consciousness. Perhaps it was picked up by an intrepid journalist looking for an intriguing human interest story, or a burgeoning academic, intrigued by unexplained phenomena. As the world moved further into the 20th century, with its increasing access to information, and a growing appetite for the mysterious, Hoar Verde found a new audience. It wasn't just old wives' tales anymore. It became a historical curiosity, a case study in the limits of knowledge. With this wider attention came renewed, though often informal, attempts to rationalize or debunk the legend. Skeptics would argue, quite reasonably, that the initial reports must have been exaggerated, or that a simple, logical explanation had been overlooked. Perhaps a small, isolated community had succumbed to a virulent, fast-acting disease that left no physical trace, a sort of silent plague, or maybe a previously unknown, perfectly camouflaged sinkhole had opened, swallowing the village whole. Along with any evidence, these theories, while plausible on paper, still struggled to account for the utter lack of any signs of distress or the meticulous, undisturbed state of the abandoned homes. How could dozens, if not hundreds, of people simply vanish without a single scream, a single piece of frantic evidence? The silence remained the most damning and inexplicable detail, a persistent echo that no rationalization could entirely suppress. As the legend solidified, it inevitably attracted more serious, albeit often unofficial, scrutiny. In later decades, perhaps a historian or an amateur investigator, armed with more modern research techniques and a deeper understanding of historical context, would revisit the Hoar Verde case. They might pore over old local archives, look for land deeds, census records, or any forgotten regional newspapers that might offer a single, overlooked clue from that fateful time. The hope would be that some piece of data, dismissed as irrelevant in the initial panic, might now reveal a pattern or an explanation. But here's where the persistent, chilling power of the Hoar Verde mystery truly reveals itself. Even with fresh eyes and a more methodical approach, the outcome remained largely the same. The historical record, much like the physical village itself, offered very little. There were no hidden documents detailing a mass migration, no secret society leaving cryptic messages, no geological surveys confirming a sudden, catastrophic collapse. The facts were, and remain, stubbornly absent. This continued lack of resolution, across multiple generations of inquiry, is what truly elevated Hoar Verde from a mere historical anomaly to a profound enigma. It wasn't just that the initial investigators failed. It was that everyone who tried, over the course of decades, met the same impenetrable wall of silence. What does it say about a mystery when even time, with its tendency to reveal secrets, only serves to deepen it? The enduring failure to find any conventional answers meant that Hoar Verde began to transcend mere local folklore and seep into the broader cultural consciousness as an archetype of the unexplained. It became a case study for writers of fiction, a point of reference for discussions about strange disappearances, and a name dropped in conversations about the truly baffling mysteries of history. It wasn't just a village that vanished. It became the vanished village, a shorthand for an event so complete in its lack of explanation that it defies rational thought. This transformation into a cultural touchstone only further solidified its legendary status. Think about it. How many historical incidents, even deeply tragic ones, retain such an active hold on the imagination nearly a century later, without a clear culprit, victim, or resolution? Hoar Verde holds its grip precisely because it offers no comfort of understanding. It doesn't allow us to neatly file it away undersolved or even partially understood. Instead, it lingers as a persistent question mark, a reminder that the world can, at times, throw up events that simply defy our intellectual grasp. And perhaps, that's precisely why it continues to fascinate us. The allure of the truly, utterly inexplicable. Despite the passage of time, and the occasional renewed interest from documentary makers, armchair detectives, or even dedicated researchers, the core mystery of Hoar Verde remains stubbornly intact. Each new generation, armed with different perspectives, and perhaps more advanced, though still inadequate, tools, approaches the problem with a fresh sense of hope. Could old maps reveal a hidden geological feature? Could overlooked weather patterns offer a clue? Could new technologies unearth a forgotten trace? Yet consistently, the answer is no. Hoar Verde steadfastly refuses to give up its secrets. No definitive evidence of a mass migration has ever surfaced, no widespread disease outbreak was recorded, and no geological anomaly has been convincingly linked to a sudden, simultaneous disappearance of an entire population. The village itself, if it even still exists in any recognizable form, offers only silence. This enduring lack of resolution isn't a failure of human ingenuity or investigation. It's a testament to the extraordinary nature of the event itself. It underscores the profound realization that some phenomena simply operate outside our current understanding, leaving us with nothing but the echoing question, what really happened in Hoar Verde? The legend lives on, not because it's been solved, but precisely because it hasn't.